Imagine the night closing in around you, the forest cold seeping through your thin jacket, and you realize you have nothing but a scrap of tarp and a few sticks. That feeling of raw vulnerability is exactly what our ancestors faced every evening, and it's the spark that drives this guide. In the next 15 minutes, I'll walk you through how to turn that helpless moment into a warm, secure shelter using only the gifts the woods provide, just as the people who first learned to survive under the open sky did. First, let's step back in time. Picture a tribe living on the edge of a dense woodland, the day's hunt just finished, the fire dwindling as the sun slips behind the horizon. Their survival depended on a night shelter that could keep the chill out, the rain at bay, and the predators at a distance. Those early builders didn't have synthetic fabrics or lightweight aluminum poles. They relied on observation, intuition, and a deep respect for the environment. Those same principles are still the most reliable tools we have when modern gear fails or when we need to travel light. Why should a modern camper care about these ancient techniques? Even the best-made tent can rip in a sudden gust, or a sleeping bag can become a sodden sack if the waterproof layer is compromised. In an emergency, the ability to improvise a shelter from the forest can be the difference between a comfortable night and a dangerous exposure. That's why today we'll focus on 3 core phases: choosing the perfect spot, building a sturdy frame, and adding natural insulation. By the end of this segment, you'll have a clear blueprint you can replicate on any trail. Let's start with the foundation of any shelter, the site. The first rule is to look for a natural windbreak, a low rise. A stand of dense shrubs or a fallen log can shield you from the prevailing breezes that strip heat away. Scan the horizon for direction the wind usually comes from. In many temperate forests, this is from the west, and position the back of your shelter toward that flow. Next, examine the ground. Avoid low-lying hollows where moisture collects after a rain, and steer clear of areas with standing water or obvious frost pockets. Instead, aim for a slightly elevated patch of dry earth, perhaps a small clearing left by a fallen tree. Sun orientation is the next hidden advantage. In the northern hemisphere, an opening that faces south captures the afternoon sun, giving you a natural heat source as the day fades. If you're in the southern hemisphere, flip that to north. A simple way to check is to note where the light filters through the canopy at midday and adjust your entrance accordingly. Keep the footprint compact. A space of about 4 square meters is ideal because a smaller volume retains heat much more efficiently. Mark the corners with a few sticks or stones to visualize the shape before you start building. Now that you have a spot, let's talk about the framework. Begin by gathering flexible, straight saplings about 8 to 10 feet long. Green wood is perfect because it bends without breaking, allowing you to shape a sturdier frame. Lay 2 of the longest poles on the ground in a V shape, their tops meeting at a ridge point. Secure that ridge by wedging a 3rd pole horizontally across the apex, creating a sturdy backbone. Then add crossbeams at regular intervals. Think of them as the ribs of a chest to give the frame stability and to distribute the weight of the covering material. With the skeleton in place, it's time to build the walls. Use smaller branches to create a lean-to structure on the windward side, overlapping them like shingles to shed rain. Leave the leeward side open for the entrance, but keep it low enough to trap warm air inside. At this stage, you can also weave in larger pieces of bark or stripped cedar to reinforce the shape and add a first layer of protection against the wind. The magic of natural insulation lies in layering. Start with a thick carpet of pine needles on the floor. They are excellent at trapping air and provide a soft, dry base. Over that, weave a blanket of bark strips, cattail leaves, or even woven grass mats between the frame's crossbeams. This creates a thermal barrier that slows heat loss. For the roof, pile a generous layer of evergreen boughs, aligning them so the tips point outward, allowing rain to run off while still trapping still air underneath. If you have access to moss, tuck a thin layer on the interior side. Moss acts like a natural sponge, absorbing residual moisture and releasing it slowly as the night warms. Here's where I want to hear from you. Think about a time you built a shelter in the wild. Whether it succeeded or fell apart, what was the biggest challenge you faced, and how did you solve it? Share your story in the comments. I'm truly curious about your experiences. Now that the shelter is framed and insulated, the final touch is to create a small opening for ventilation. Even the best insulated space needs a way for fresh air to circulate, preventing condensation and maintaining a healthy oxygen level. Cut a narrow slit near the top of the roof, just big enough for a breath of wind to slip through. Position it on the leeward side, opposite the main entrance so that warm air can escape while cooler air is drawn in through the doorway. This simple airflow system can keep the interior dry through the night, even when the forest humidity rises. Finally, add a few finishing touches that make the shelter feel like home. Gather a bundle of dry twigs and kindling, arrange them in a small pit near the entrance, and build a modest fire, just enough to provide heat without drawing unwanted attention. Use a stone circle to contain the flames and place a few large rocks around the perimeter to reflect warmth back into the shelter. If you have a piece of bark or a hollowed-out log, line it with fresh leaves to create a makeshift sleeping pad. These small details not only improve comfort, but also reinforce the connection to the natural world, echoing the practices of those ancient builders. If you're finding these techniques as eye-opening as I do, consider subscribing so we can explore the next steps together, things like natural ventilation tricks, water collection, and how to pack all this knowledge into a lightweight backpack. The journey to mastering ancestral shelter building has just begun, and there's so much more to uncover. Now that you have a solid, insulated frame and a simple ventilation slit, let's move into the subtle art of harnessing the forest's own breath to keep the interior dry and comfortable throughout the night. The ancient builders understood that a shelter that holds heat but cannot release moisture will become a damp, miserable space. The key is to create a controlled pathway for air that encourages warm, moist air to rise and escape while drawing cooler, drier air in through the doorway. Begin by widening the narrow opening at the top of the roof, just enough for a gentle stream of wind to slip through, but not so large that a sudden gust will extinguish your fire or chill the interior. A good rule of thumb is to make the slit about the width of a thumb when you spread your hand flat. Position this vent on the side of the shelter that faces away from the prevailing wind, the leeward side, so the wind first passes over the roof before it reaches the opening. This way the airflow is smoother and less turbulent, allowing the warm air inside to rise naturally and exit without creating drafts that could pull heat out. To further enhance the airflow, consider adding a small secondary vent near the base of the entrance. This can be a simple gap between two lower logs or a thin slit cut in the side wall. Because warm air rises, the low vent will draw cooler air into the shelter, creating a gentle circulation loop. You'll notice a faint hiss as the breeze moves through the shelter, a subtle reminder that the space is breathing. If you ever feel a buildup of condensation on the interior walls, gently poke the low vent a little wider with a stick. The extra airflow will carry the moisture away. With ventilation sorted, let's talk about fire, both the practical heat source and the psychological comfort of a flickering flame. Building a fire inside a small shelter can be risky, so the ancient technique is to create a fire pit just outside the entrance, separated by a stone ring that acts as a heat shield. Gather a handful of dry twigs and kindling, arrange them in a teepee shape, and light them with a spark from a flint or a modern lighter if you carry one. Once the flames are steady, add a few larger logs, but keep the fire modest, large enough to radiate warmth, small enough to avoid drawing unwanted attention from wildlife. The stone circle you build around the fire serves multiple purposes. First, it contains the flames, preventing them from spreading onto dry leaves or low branches. Second, the rocks absorb heat and radiate it back into the shelter as the night cools, creating a gentle, lingering warmth even after the fire has dwindled. If you have a flat piece of bark or a shallow hollow log, you can line it with fresh leaves and place it near the fire as a primitive cooking surface, great for warming a broth or melting some chocolate for a morale boost. Now let's address sleeping comfort. The ground beneath your shelter can be cold and uneven, so creating a natural sleeping pad is essential. Look for a thick layer of moss, preferably the soft, spongy kind that feels like a cushion underfoot. If moss is scarce, you can stack layers of pine needles, evergreen boughs, and even a few pieces of bark to form a plush mattress. Arrange these layers so that the larger, stiffer materials are at the bottom, providing insulation from the cold earth, while the softer foliage sits on top for comfort. Before you settle down, fluff the material with your hands to create an even surface, and if you have a piece of bark that you can split open, line it with dry leaves to add a smooth, dry barrier between you and the ground. A small but often overlooked detail is the placement of a windbreak around the entrance. Use fallen logs, large rocks, or a low wall of brush to block the wind from blowing directly into the doorway. This not only reduces the chill that can seep in when you open the shelter, but also helps to keep the fire's heat directed toward you rather than being whisked away. Take a moment to arrange these natural barriers symmetrically, creating a semi-enclosed vestibule that feels like a protective cocoon. While you're settling in for the night, think about water collection, a vital skill if you intend to stay longer than a single evening. The forest offers several low-tech methods to gather moisture without the need for modern containers. One of the simplest is to set up a shallow depression on the ground near the shelter, line it with a piece of bark or a smooth stone, and place a collection of leaves or a small bundle of pine needles inside. As the night air cools, dew will form on the foliage and drip into the depression, providing a modest amount of water. If you have a piece of hollowed-out log or a bamboo segment, you can use it as a natural trough, positioning it to catch runoff from any light rain that falls on the roof of your shelter. Remember to keep the collection area clean and away from any sources of contamination, such as animal droppings, to ensure the water remains safe to drink. Speaking of safety, always keep an eye on the fire's behavior. Even a small flame can become unpredictable if the wind shifts unexpectedly. Have a handful of damp earth or a small bundle of wet leaves nearby, ready to smother the fire should it flare up. This practice mirrors the ancient habit of always preparing a firekill kit, a simple but effective precaution that could mean the difference between a controlled warmth and an uncontrolled blaze. Now, let's consider the long-term perspective, leaving no trace. When you eventually dismantle your shelter, aim to return the site to its original state as much as possible. Gently disassemble the frame, taking care not to damage living trees or break branches that could later provide shelter for wildlife. Scatter the natural insulation materials, bark strips, pine needles, moss back onto the forest floor where they belong, allowing them to decompose naturally. If you used any tools, such as a small axe or a knife, clean them thoroughly before packing them away to avoid introducing foreign substances to the environment. Before you break camp, take a moment to perform a quick sweep of the area. Look for any small debris, stray tinder, or broken sticks that could pose a hazard to future hikers or animals. By returning the spot to its pristine condition, you honor the ancient philosophy that the forest is a shared resource, not a personal playground. This respect for the land is at the heart of the ancestral shelter tradition, a lesson that has been passed down through countless generations. Now that you have the full suite of techniques from site selection and orientation, through frame construction, natural insulation, ventilation, fire management, sleeping comfort, water collection, and responsible levonotrace, practices consider how each element interlocks like the pieces of a puzzle. The beauty of this approach is that you can adapt each step to the specific environment you find yourself in. In a dense, damp rainforest, you might prioritize a higher roof and more robust ventilation to combat humidity. In a high-altitude alpine meadow, insulation the floor is layers to retain heat. Underlying and the warmth of the fire principles reflect stay the off the same conditions, creating a just as our cozy glow that ancestors did invites you to millennia ago. Back to in the time when you built a shelter in the wild. But perhaps you faced an rustle of leaves, unexpected storm, and the faint whisper of the wind sounds that have accompanied humans for countless ages, stable in that foundation. How did you improvise? You a makeshift ridge part of an pole, using only what instant nature shelter. As the stories in the night comments, remember that each breath you challenged and take, and to the tested your ingenuity overcame them. Sunrise, if you will find you rested insights useful, your mind clear and appreciated. Algorithm know that whether you content choose to like this continue resonates with you, timeless or techniques. Shelter that can be, if you'd like to keep assembled in under 10 minutes, consider waterproofing. Let me know exploring which topic you'd like to see such as natural next. Shapes the direction of future crafting episodes. Tailor your content to what you learning how to truly create crave. Before we visualize each of these final skills builds upon the scene. A modest shelter nestled against a gentle hill, its roof catching the last deepening your golden rays of the connection to the setting sun, enhancing your small fire crackling self-reliance just outside. Thank you for a thin plume on me on this smoke journey through rising lazily into the ancestral twilight sky. Inside, the wood air focus on circulates maximizing softly. Insulation the floor is layers to retain heat, cushioned with moss and pine needles. Underlying, and the warmth of the fire principles reflects stay the off the same stone circle, creating a just as our cozy glow that ancestors did invites you to millennia ago. Settle in for restorative nights rest back to in the time when you wild. Owl, the perhaps you faced and rustle of leaves, and the faint whisper of the wind sounds that have accompanied humans for countless ages. Stable in that foundation moment, modern did you camper, people who have, or did you learn to live in discover a natural with the land, using only what instant nature shelter provides. As the stories in the night comments deepens, remember that each breath you challenge and take within this breakthrough's shelter is a helps us all testament to the learn and knowledge of those who grow together, came before you, and I cultivated today. Sunrise, if you will find you rested, warmed by the fires, a quick residual heat, your mind clear and appreciated, ready for the challenges of a new day. Algorithm, know that whether you content choose to like this continue resonates with you exploring the forest. Trek onward to a new horizon, quietly and watch and if your sunrise break through the canopy, deeper you will do so with confidence, perhaps into the rooted in art of ancient wisdom. Shelter that can be, if you'd like to keep assembled in under 10 minutes, expanding your repertoire, your fibers, game, before we system using wrap-up sand, let's take a charcoal, and moss. Visualize each of these final skills builds upon the scene foundation we've laid today, enhancing your small fire crackling self-reliance. Thank you for a thin plume on me on this smoke journey through rising lazily into the ancestral twilight sky shelter building. Your curiosity fuels these adventures, and your participation makes each episode richer. If you feel inspired, hit the like button, leave a comment with your thoughts or questions, and share this video with friends who love the outdoors. And of course, if you haven't already, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next deep dive into the world of primitive technologies. Together, we'll continue to uncover the secrets that have allowed humans to thrive in the wild for countless generations. Until next time, keep exploring, stay safe, and may the forest always welcome you home.